As a musician, one of your biggest aspirations is to find your own artistic identity. Many bands can spend their entire career trying to create their own unique sound or gimmick that will etch themselves into the minds of fans for years to come. But on the other hand, gimmicks can run out pretty quickly. Instead of just riding the wave of their initial star power, many bands have a tendency to drop what it is that made them such a draw in the first place. This could take the form of a new look, new sound, or just a different mindset towards creating music. Whether it's for a one-off musical experiment or a fully fledged course correction, these artists were not afraid to leave their old selves behind for something much more interesting. While it's definitely debatable as to whether these shifts were in the, correct decision, you certainly have to admire these artists' bravery in dissecting themselves and forging ahead down a much different path. With that in mind, I'm Will for WhatCulture, and here are 7 bands that ditched what made them famous. 7. Genesis. If you were into any stripe of prog music in the 70s, Genesis sealed the deal with their extravagant soundscapes and manic musical movements. Under the watchful eye of Peter Gabriel, the band pushed the boundaries of typical rock music and turned the standard 3-minute rock song into great musical passages with complex chord changes and sophisticated metric shifts. Once Gabriel left the band though, things began to turn in a different direction. After finding the perfect replacement in drummer Phil Collins, the band began making music that strayed away from their complicated songcrafting. By the time the band had reached the 80s, they were making full-blown pop rocks with songs like That's All and Invisible Touch. Until this point in time, the band had a very niche audience with their zany prog stylings as their calling card. This led to an overwhelming backlash from the fans who preferred the more classic prog sound of the band. While many cried sell out at this point in the band's career, the members never seemed to express cynicism towards their more commercial sounds. Instead of using their latter period to absent-mindedly cash checks, the pop crossover of Genesis seemed like the natural progression after years of sonic experimentation. 6. Metallica. There is probably no singular act that is as beloved and reviled in metal circles as Metallica. When the band broke out of the San Francisco metal scene in the early 80s, their sound would become the blueprint for all thrash metal going forward. Though most fans would tell you that any of the band's 80s albums is mandatory listening for metalheads, the next few decades saw the bands toying with their unusual style. While the band reached for the gold with their self-titled album in 1991, the hardcore metalheads felt somewhat betrayed by the shift in sound. That betrayal seemed to be kicked into overdrive once the band released Load and Reload, with songs that had more to do with blues rock and alternative music than metal. All this experimentation eventually reached a boiling point with Saint Anger, and the band trying to become heavier and falling flat on their faces. In recent years, the band seemed to be back in full force, with albums that never failed to bring back memories of the group's metallic glory days. Even if the band sounded less like themselves in the 90s, the music they created still holds up as some of the greatest hard rock of all time. 5. Blink-182. Blink-182 were some of the most lovable brats to come out of the pop-punk scene at the turn of the century, with albums like Enema of the State and Take Off Your Pants and Jacket. The band perfectly towed the line between adolescent songwriting about diarrhea and poignant compositions that spoke to the young teen demographic. By 2002, the band were heading into the studio for their latest record, with fans prepared for some more adrenaline-fueled pop-punk bliss. Instead of getting reruns of songs like All the Small Things, fans were treated to a more alt-rock approach, as the band focused on blistering guitars and more mature subject matters like divorce and the loss of human connection. The record was massive, but the dynamics within the group caused the band to break up shortly afterward. When they finally got back together, their next release, Neighborhoods, doubled down on the experimentation. Nowadays, the band seem to have returned to the more fun-loving punk rock sound that made them famous, but these records are a great what-if story of where the band could be today if things had played out just a little differently. 4. Rush. If you ever saw yourself as a prog enthusiast, Rush was the answer to your prayers. Across the band's impeccable run in the 70s, the group took the complexity of a band like Yes and incorporated the blunt power of Black Sabbath to create a relentless sonic assault. And sure, although audiences eventually got used to their mind-blowing riff crafting, the band never intended to stay in that lane for too long. From their beginnings, they had always had a mantra that no genre didn't fit within the Rush aesthetic. As the band finished writing their masterpiece Moving Pictures, they refocused their style from unstoppable riffs to a sound more dominated by keyboards. While the band were having some disagreements, what is commonly known as the band's synth period has some stellar material, from the heartbreaking survival story of Red Sector A to the borderline pop rock of Time Stand Still. The synths eventually dissipated, with the band continuing to tinker with their sound until their eventual end in 2015. In bucking the trends of other similar bands, Rush proved to be the most progressive of the progressive rock bands by reaching for any influence at their disposal. 3. Radiohead. Radiohead had the world at their feet once they reached the end of the 90s. Whereas many bands were getting bogged down in warbly post-grunge and edgy new metal, Radiohead's unique brand of sonic bliss seemed to point the way forward for rock music in the new millennium. But once the band finished the tour for their critically acclaimed OK Computer, they packed up the guitars and brought out the synthesizers. Upon first listen, fans were just delirious as to what they were hearing on the band's next record, Kid A. Here were songs that didn't have the trademark guitar sound of Johnny Greenwood, and in its place were ominous piano songs and chilling ambient noise. This radical shift should have been career suicide, and it would have been for any other band, but Radiohead turned this new direction into their next artistic masterpiece. Slowly sidestepping any kind of backlash, the public were left amazed by the band's unique soundscapes and the yearning melancholy of the vocal performances. Instead of meandering in different styles and falling flat, Radiohead showed the rest of the music world that they had only just begun to amaze everyone. 2. U2. As the 80s were winding down, U2 had settled into their place as one of the kings of rock music. Not only had they made strides for social change at Live Aid, but they also released what many consider to be the best album of the 80s with The Joshua Tree. With fans itching for more of the band's ethereal sound and bombastic performances, the lads from Dublin had other plans for their musical direction. Instead of reaching for the mantle of kings of rock, the band circumvented their usual image by immersing themselves in postmodern irony. Suddenly, Bono went from being the most captivating frontman in the world to a more cynical caricature of what a pompous rock star looked like. While it still made for great entertainment on a live stage, the ethos had turned a corner. Fans were even more shocked when the band put out Achtung Baby, with songs that incorporated more electronic sounds along with a subdued writing style. Though fans may have been scratching their heads, this change of pace was exactly what the band needed, as it made them fit right in amid the new alternative rock scene coming to fruition. The time for rock was over. The era of The Fly was born. 1. Kiss. Whether or not you cared for their music, there is no denying that Kiss made an impression when they broke onto the scene in the 70s. With each member dressed to the nine in heels and clad in horrifying black and white makeup, the band presented a stage show that brought the typical rock performance to circus-like proportions. However, as the band transitioned into the 80s, they found it harder to find a footing amidst the shifting rock landscape. In an effort to shock their audience, the band decided to do the unthinkable and shed their trademark makeup. To say this was a big deal for fans was an understatement. From the time the band hit it big, the biggest draw of Kiss was not knowing what these four badasses actually looked like underneath the makeup. After completely exposing their mugs live on MTV, the band persevered through the 80s, adopting the glam metal look that they helped pioneer in their 70s glory days. Though the band has put the makeup back on since their 80s period, the initial decision to shed their iconic stage skin stands as one of the gutsiest moves a shock rock band of their caliber could have done. And there you have it, folks, 7 bands that ditched what made them famous. Feel free to drop this video a like if you enjoyed it, and drop me a follow on Twitter at YouSlyDogU. I'm Will for WhatCulture, thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you next time.
Look, my son, look at the marvel that I have created. Comics. They called me a fool for trying to put a dead meme onto a t-shirt. A damn bold fool! A damn bold fool with an ass that won't quit. It got quite personal towards the end there. But look who's laughing now! Quiet! Quiet, my son, my ugly son, for my other creation rises. Look at the quality fabric, hand-stitched by blind orphans. The perfect letter spacing calculated so meticulously that Rich Hudson had an erection for months about it. And a colouring so deep that I had to buy the dye off the dark web. Oh, for God's sake, Josh!
Sorry.
Marvel. Oh no, the beast has grown angry, angered by our drab fashion choices. I am such a fool to think that it wouldn't try to infect us with its perfect design. Quick, we must do something to appease the beast. Why don't we buy one from shop.whatculture.com? Look, it's already got Scott Nash.
Oh no!
But where can I buy one? Are you kidding me? This is why I don't give you any extra lines. But also at shop.whatculture.com. Quick, let's go and buy one right now. Let's go buy one right now.
Right now.
Oh, don't you try hard now. You've already lost your bit. Oscar's in the f***ing bin. Ah, there we go. Doesn't that look better? I feel so virile and alive, and it's also fixed your hump. That's actually pretty good. Now, do yourself a favour and act like your mum and spread the love, aka her legs, and buy yourself one of these glorious dead memes on a t-shirt, courtesy of this handsome chap right here. You're very, very welcome.
Cut!
Jesus Christ, mine is so
It's
itchy.
all wet. What?
It stinks.
I pissed on yours.
The worst font ever. I want to die.